Are you ready to learn the truth about the expedition that forever changed the balance of power across an entire continent? Historical chronicles have long concealed the details of this massive campaign, which turned out to be a spectacular tactical failure. A detachment of experienced conquistadors set off into uncharted lands, driven by enormous ambition and a thirst for total control. It is commonly believed that European expeditions easily overcame resistance, thanks to their absolute technological superiority.
However, the landing of a Spanish expedition on this coast revealed a completely different reality.
Huge transport ships slowly unloaded heavy artillery and bulky carts onto the sticky sandy shore. The deep sand instantly blocked the wheels, forcing the soldiers to drag the heavy loads by hand onto solid ground. This first stage of the landing took several exhausting weeks instead of the planned 2 days.
They expected an easy victory, but were confronted with an incredibly complex and well-thought-out defense system.
Watch the video to the end to find out how the command's overconfidence led to the catastrophic collapse of the entire campaign. What if I told you that everything you believed was a lie? The commander of the expedition established strict rules from the very first moments of their stay on the new land. The huge camp was laid out according to the strict geometric rules of the military art of the time. Tents were lined up in neat rows along a hastily erected palisade, forming a protected enclosed perimeter. Watchtowers provided a circular view of the surrounding area to prevent any sudden attacks. Inside the camp, blacksmiths worked continuously, repairing metal equipment damaged during the long voyage.
Strict discipline maintained order, but required constant effort from every participant in this large-scale expedition.
Gradually, the surrounding landscape began to change dramatically, revealing vast and carefully cultivated fields. The scale of these agricultural lands amazed the Europeans, who were accustomed to small and compact farm plots. Neat rows of unknown crops stretched far beyond the horizon, indicating the high density of the local population. The army moved through these deserted fields for several days without encountering a single living soul. This silent retreat of the local population was part of a well-thought-out strategy to gradually wear down the enemy. The invaders were deliberately allowed to penetrate deep into foreign territory, stretching their vital supply lines. The commander finally realized that he had been drawn into a protracted campaign with no clear and understandable front line. He gave a strict order to build a fortified, temporary fort to protect the remaining valuable supplies. The soldiers reluctantly set about building high earthen ramparts and sturdy wooden palisades. The daily hard labor under the scorching sun quickly depleted the physical strength of the entire expeditionary force.
The absence of open and clear confrontation frightened the armed men much more than actual combat.
The tension grew with every kilometer traveled, foreshadowing an inevitable and violent clash between two different interests. The expedition's leadership stubbornly continued to believe in the power of their advanced weapons and their unquestionable authority. However, the harsh reality around them increasingly dictated its own uncompromising rules of the game. We are very interested to hear your opinion on the initial tactical plans of these ambitious conquistadors. What do you think about their strategy for exploring new territories? Write about it in the comments and be sure to subscribe to our channel. Guess what happened next? The advance of the Spanish vanguard led to the discovery of a large fortified settlement located on a wide plateau. Tall rows of wooden palisades blocked the way forward, demonstrating the serious defensive capabilities of the local tribes they encountered. Scouts urgently reported thousands of trained warriors ready to defend their territories against foreign invasion. The commander made a strong-willed decision not to retreat, but to brazenly set up camp in close proximity to these fortress walls. Such audacity was intended to show the numerous enemy the invaders' absolute confidence in their strength and technology. The Indians did not sit passively behind the walls and brought their dense troops out into the open field. Their formation was strikingly different from the classic European battle formations in its apparent chaos at first glance.
However, upon closer inspection, the strict and well-coordinated organization of each individual unit became clear.
The local warriors were armed with long spears with sharp stone tips and massive wooden clubs. The colorful tall plumes on the heads of the local commanders served as excellent visual landmarks for controlling the troops. Spanish officers struggled to maintain order among the incredibly exhausted and disoriented soldiers. Loud commands were drowned out by the general noise of the fierce battle, requiring maximum personal concentration from each fighter. The Europeans' temporary camp was seriously damaged during continuous attacks from completely different and unexpected directions. The soldiers immediately began the urgent and difficult task of restoring all the destroyed wooden defensive structures. Both armies were intensely preparing for a new stage of large-scale confrontation, pulling all available resources to the line of contact. The calm before the coming storm hung heavily in the air, causing the soldiers to reflexively grip their weapons tighter. Spanish officers developed detailed plans for a breakthrough, taking into account all the features of the local wooden fortifications that had been revealed.
Local leaders carefully organized their forces to defend the settlement and control every approach.
Do you think the Europeans, armed with arquebuses, could have avoided direct conflict in such a deadlock situation? Read on to the next chapter to find out what unexpected alliances they had to form in order to save themselves. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about is the Conquistadors' remarkable ability to play a complex diplomatic game behind enemy lines. Finding himself in a critical and hopeless situation, De Soto secretly sent envoys to neighboring tribes that had historically been at odds with the city's defenders. These complex negotiations were conducted in the strictest secrecy, under cover of night and away from prying eyes. The Spaniards pragmatically offered their military support in exchange for provisions and experienced local guides. The local chiefs, in turn, saw these heavily armored strangers as a convenient tool for settling old territorial scores. Both sides masterfully wove complex intrigues, pursuing exclusively their own selfish goals in this alliance. The conclusion of this temporary alliance was accompanied by lavish ceremonies and the obligatory exchange of symbolic and valuable gifts.
The visitors offered iron knives, sturdy axes, and bright decorative items to strengthen their temporary partnership.
The huge city found itself completely cut off from the outside world, plunged into a very tense and frightening silence. The defenders regularly attempted daring night raids to destroy the Spanish siege structures under construction. However, experienced Spanish sentries noticed the impending threat in time and raised a loud alarm throughout the camp. Short and extremely fierce skirmishes at the very foot of the walls invariably ended with the attackers quickly retreating. The ring of the tight blockade grew tighter with each passing day, completely depriving the besieged of their freedom of maneuver. The long days of monotonous waiting seriously tested the discipline within the motley Allied camp. Inevitable and loud conflicts arose over the unfair distribution of scarce trophies and remaining provisions.
The commanders had to maintain extremely strict discipline to keep this large and fragile alliance functioning.
The ultimate success of the entire campaign now depended solely on maintaining the unity of these completely different cultures. Be sure to support this video. Don't forget to like it. What if everything you've been taught is outdated? Classic siege tactics proved completely ineffective against this huge metropolis, surrounded by natural water barriers. The capital of the Indian state was a complex and confusing maze of narrow streets and well-fortified squares. The leaders of the besieged clearly had no intention of surrendering, skillfully turning every residential building into an impregnable small bastion. They masterfully used a complex system of signal smoke fires to coordinate the defense of various isolated sectors. Spanish officers watched with undisguised amazement at the enemy's flawless and coordinated military organization. The arquebusiers fired a coordinated volley, tearing wide gaps in the advancing columns of Indians. Thick gunpowder smoke instantly mixed with the dust kicked up by the battle, limiting visibility on the battlefield to a few meters. The battle very quickly broke down into hundreds of separate local clashes across the wide front of the attack. The strict discipline of the European rectangular boxes was severely tested by the chaos of unpredictable close combat. The Allied Indians struck the advancing forces hard on the flanks, desperately trying to close the ring of encirclement. However, the defenders of the city skillfully used their hidden reserves, preventing a dangerous encirclement of their positions. The battle turned into a methodical, grinding down of resources on both sides, with no clear advantage for either. Both armies suffered heavy and irreplaceable losses, but categorically refused to give up the battlefield. Spanish officers personally led their exhausted soldiers in counterattacks, trying to regain the lost initiative. Local tribal chiefs were also at the forefront, inspiring their fierce warriors by personal example. The outcome of this grand clash literally hung in the balance for several long and exhausting hours. By evening, both sides were completely exhausted by this unprecedented physical and moral strain. All hopes for a quick and easy surrender of the capital were finally and irrevocably shattered by harsh reality. What further steps do you think the command will take in the midst of this protracted and deep crisis? In the next chapter, you will learn how blind self-confidence led the army into a fatal and massive trap. Early in the morning, Indian negotiators unexpectedly appeared before the Spanish camp with an offer of peace. The chiefs expressed their willingness to allow De Soto's advance guard into the city for formal and solemn negotiations. This offer seemed like an incredible and long-awaited stroke of luck after months of exhausting and completely fruitless siege. The outer ring of the siege did not immediately realize the true extent of the tactical disaster unfolding inside the city. The massive city walls reliably muffled all sounds of the fierce fighting taking place in the central streets of the capital. The officers remaining outside tried with growing concern to understand the reason for the sudden closure of the main gates. Alarm in the camp grew with every minute of complete absence of any agreed signals from the advance guard. The artillerymen, on their own initiative, began to deploy their guns, preparing to break through the powerful fortifications of the capital. Inside the seething city, De Soto desperately tried to gather the scattered groups of his soldiers into a single striking force. Officers literally shouted themselves hoarse, giving orders amid the unimaginable din of these fierce street clashes. A small handful of survivors managed with difficulty to take up positions in one of the large stone buildings on the edge of the square. They hastily barricaded the doors and windows with broken furniture, preparing for a long and completely hopeless siege. This temporary shelter allowed them to regroup their remaining forces and soberly assess the scale of their dire situation. The breakout from this stone bag became the most desperate and daring maneuver in the entire history of the expedition. The soldiers closed their shields tightly and rushed into the narrow corridor formed by the buildings that had collapsed from the shelling. They cut their way through with short swords, ignoring the countless shells flying overhead. Speed was their only real chance to avoid complete destruction in this brutal urban maze. Every second of delay cost new irreplaceable losses among experienced and battle-hardened fighters. The remnants of the shattered vanguard broke out of the city and joined the main forces of the besieging European troops. This panicked retreat meant a complete loss of initiative and a crushing blow to the infallible prestige of the command. A significant portion of valuable military equipment and supplies was left abandoned in the narrow streets of this unconquered city. The Indian chiefs rightly celebrated their grand tactical success, having shamefully repelled the elite units of the European army. The Spanish camp instantly plunged into a state of deep shock at the realization of its vulnerability and massive defeat. Guess what happened next? The heavy loss of the vanguard and a significant portion of supplies forced the command to make the difficult decision to retreat. Continuing a senseless siege of an impregnable city without sufficient provisions was tantamount to slow suicide. De Soto gave strict orders to break camp in strict secrecy, under cover of a completely moonless night. The soldiers silently gathered the surviving tents and loaded the remains of the light artillery onto the surviving wagons. The fires in the abandoned camp remained burning brightly to create the complete illusion of the army's presence for the vigilant enemy. The march of the retreating army was strikingly different from its confident and triumphant advance a few months earlier. The scattered column moved quickly, trying to get as far away as possible from possible pursuit by mobile Indian units. The officers imposed the strictest discipline, suppressing any attempts to slow down the overall high pace of the unit's movement. Heavy cannons, hopelessly stuck in the mud, were abandoned after their firing ports had been riveted shut. The army ruthlessly got rid of all excess baggage in order to maximize its maneuverability and mobility. The allied tribes, clearly seeing the weakness of the Spaniards, began to desert en masse from the united retreating camp. They silently left the army under cover of night, taking with them the high-quality metal weapons they had been issued. The loss of these guides was an incredibly heavy blow, leaving the Spanish command without accurate maps of the area. The detachment was forced to move almost blindly, relying only on compass readings and the intuition of their own scouts. The risk of getting lost forever in the endless forests became another serious threat to the survival of the entire expedition. The lack of provisions forced the soldiers to switch to foraging and severely rationing the remaining food. Foragers desperately gathered wild roots and unknown fruits, which could not provide the necessary level of energy. Hunting under constant pursuit was virtually impossible and attracted completely unnecessary attention from the enemy. Hunger became a constant companion of the retreating army, sapping the physical strength of even the most enduring and robust veterans. The harsh economy of resources caused deep irritation and the first frightening signs of disobedience to the officers' orders. The remnants of the once great and brilliant army turned into a wandering camp of exhausted and desperate people. The golden imperial ambitions were replaced by a single, simple goal: to survive and return to solid ground. Abandoned heavy weapons and rusty armor marked their mournful and long journey through the wild forests of the continent. Do you think the command will be able to maintain control over the detachment in the face of such a catastrophic crisis? In the next chapter, you will learn how an invisible natural threat finally undermined the invaders' forces. The prolonged retreat through completely uncharted territory led the army to the swampy lowlands of a huge river delta. The Spaniards desperately hoped to find shelter from their pursuers and convenient access to the long-awaited seacoast. However, this decision proved fatal, as the local microclimate concealed a huge and unusual danger. Thick, humid vapors constantly rose from the stagnant water, creating a dense, suffocating fog around the camp. The air was saturated with the smell of rotting vegetation, which caused constant weakness and dizziness among the soldiers. This oppressive atmosphere weighed heavily on the psyche, depriving people of their remaining optimism and faith in imminent salvation. Soon, this invisible natural threat began to methodically mow down the ranks of the once invincible Expeditionary Corps. A mysterious weakness swept through entire detachments, depriving experienced warriors of the ability to hold their weapons firmly in their hands. Transporting heavy artillery and wooden carts became physically impossible in the soft and boggy ground. The command made the extremely difficult decision to abandon the last cannons in order to at least slightly facilitate the advance of the infantry. Valuable metal weapons slowly sank into the swampy mud, remaining forever in this foreign land. This step meant the final and unconditional abandonment of any plans to conquer and subjugate the territories. Now it was a matter of urgently evacuating the few who could still move on their own. De Soto himself, the iron-willed and unyielding commander of the expedition, did not escape the common fate of his exhausted soldiers. An invisible threat completely drained his strength, confining him to a camp bed in the center of the temporary camp. Without their strong leader, the officers began to argue fiercely about the choice of the army's further route to safety. The unified command split into several warring factions, each proposing its own plan of action. The lack of a clear strategy at a time of deep crisis only exacerbated the panic among the simple and frightened rank and file. The detachment found itself trapped in its own powerlessness amid the lifeless and endless swamplands. The surrounding landscape consisted of twisted trees and gray stagnant water stretching far beyond the misty horizon. The hope of a quick return home was replaced by the extremely grim realization of their complete and unconditional vulnerability. An invisible threat had achieved what tens of thousands of armed Indian warriors had failed to accomplish in battle. It had completely broken the will of the Conquistadors, turning the proud conquerors into exhausted captives of insurmountable circumstances. The expedition had finally lost its integrity, turning into a group of individuals struggling to survive without a common goal. The disaster had reached its absolute climax, leaving no chance for a successful outcome. The remaining officers had to organize the last, most desperate and risky stage of the retreat. The forced long stop in the swamps turned into a full-fledged siege for the expedition, completely exhausting its forces. The invaders were unable to maneuver, finding themselves pinned down by the bend of a deep and murky swamp river. Mobile Indian units once again closed the encirclement, occupying all the high ground around the Spanish camp. They made no attempt to storm the camp, preferring to methodically and calmly block any possible escape routes for the enemy. This cold calculation on the part of the local chiefs demonstrated their deep understanding of the strategy of protracted positional warfare. The psychological pressure on the besieged grew rapidly in proportion to the decline in their physical ability to resist. Every night, the Indians lit huge bright fires around the perimeter, completely illuminating the Spanish positions. Loud ritual chants and drumming did not stop for a minute, completely preventing the Europeans from sleeping. This continuous auditory assault broke the soldiers' psyche, depriving them of their ability to think rationally. Some fighters could not withstand the tension and tried to break through the tight ring of encirclement on their own. Such desperate forays invariably ended with the quick and silent interception of the fugitives in the thick forest. The officers tried with their last ounce of strength to maintain some semblance of discipline by organizing regular patrols of the few remaining posts. However, their orders were increasingly being openly sabotaged by the tired and hopeless rank-and-file infantrymen. The surrounded camp froze in heavy anticipation of the inevitable denouement of its incredibly tragic story on the new continent. The soldiers stopped repairing the dilapidated fortifications, passively awaiting the final massive assault by the Indian troops. Time turned into a viscous and endless substance, measured only by the dull beats of enemy drums in the darkness. The siege of attrition had achieved its main goal, completely and unconditionally paralyzing the army's will to resist. All that remained was to prepare for a final, desperate dash across the river, which promised to be no less deadly. De Soto, having finally and irrevocably lost control of the situation, could no longer influence the decisions of his subordinates. The expedition had reached the fateful line beyond which all laws of military honor and tactics were erased. Every participant in this disastrous campaign understood that salvation was only possible through incredible luck. The ring of the tight blockade had finally closed, leaving only one narrow and incredibly dangerous exit along the river. The river was to become either a difficult road to salvation or the last gloomy refuge of the Spanish Armada. The prolonged stay in conditions of total isolation led to the final collapse of military subordination within the camp. The officers completely lost their authority, unable to provide their soldiers with the basic means of subsistence. Orders were openly ignored or carried out with ostentatious reluctance, bordering on blatant sabotage. Groups of privates began to unite into small factions that aggressively defended only their own local interests. The Unified Expeditionary Corps broke up into dozens of independent armed groups that were openly hostile to each other. This internal moral decay posed no less a threat than the Indian blockade outside. The distribution of food rations became a dangerous daily procedure, accompanied by heated verbal exchanges. The strongest and most aggressive fighters took large portions of the meager camp rations by force. The best building materials went exclusively to those who could defend them with a loaded arquebus. Officers tried unsuccessfully to unite the efforts of carpenters to build several large and reliable ships. Selfishness and panic prevailed over common sense and the tactical expediency of coordinated action. Some soldiers, having lost all hope, voluntarily left the camp and surrendered to the mercy of the Indians. They preferred the frightening uncertainty of captivity to the slow exhaustion of a besieged and conflict-ridden fort. The fate of these fugitives remained unknown, giving rise to the darkest rumors among the remaining fighters. These constant escapes further weakened the perimeter of defense, making the Conquistadors' positions extremely vulnerable. The remaining soldiers looked with contempt at those who were leaving, understanding their despair, but completely unforgiving of their betrayal. The final loss of De Soto's leadership role incredibly accelerated the processes of disintegration within the expedition. The commander, broken physically and morally, could no longer serve as the unifying force for the army. His orders remained on paper, finding no executors among the demoralized and exhausted people. The resulting power vacuum was filled by random leaders who lacked the necessary tactical experience and knowledge. This management crisis put an end to any attempts at an organized and safe retreat. The chances of success were slim, but it was the only way out of the stone bag. The expedition was preparing hard for its final chord, which was supposed to put everything in its place. Launching the improvised flotilla was accompanied by enormous technical difficulties and unimaginable confusion. The heavy, hastily constructed rafts had great difficulty breaking away from the sticky shore, constantly getting stuck in shallow water. The soldiers had to wade waist-deep in icy water to push these unwieldy structures into deeper water. The Indians did not miss this moment and opened heavy fire from a safe and comfortable distance. Panic instantly gripped the disorganized groups of Europeans, desperately trying to take cover behind the flimsy wooden sides. An organized retreat never materialized, and a completely chaotic flight down the wide river began. The river turned out to be not a lifeline, but another deadly trap for the pitiful remnants of the expedition. The powerful current spun the unwieldy rafts uncontrollably, smashing them against sharp snags hidden under the water. It was practically impossible to control these structures with long poles due to the enormous speed of the current. The Indians' maneuverable boats easily maneuvered between the Spanish vessels, delivering precise and very painful blows. Lightly armed warriors showered the conquistadors with a barrage of heavy arrows, remaining out of reach of the arquebus's return fire. The scale of losses in this final clash far exceeded all previous disasters of the campaign. The dense ranks of the once invincible conquistadors rapidly thinned with each passing minute under the continuous fire of Indian archers. They faced a long and arduous journey along the unknown coast in search of friendly Spanish colonies. The survivors will forever remember this chilling finale to the most ambitious campaign of their cruel era. The consequences of this failed expedition forever changed the Spanish crown's approach to the exploration of new continental territories. The illusion of easy conquest was shattered by the harsh reality of organized resistance and natural barriers. It became absolutely clear that technological superiority alone was not enough to maintain control over vast territories. The archives kept the details of this spectacular failure secret for a long time, so as not to undermine the authority and prestige of the empire. History punished blind self-confidence extremely harshly, demonstrating the true cost of imperial ambitions in uncharted lands. We can see that this historical episode was not just a series of random failures, but the natural result of blind self-confidence. The escalation of the conflict, from the first arrogant steps to the desperate flight, shows the complete inability of the invaders to adapt. The conquistadors turned from hunters into prey, catastrophically underestimating the organization and tactical skills of the local tribes. The massive failure of this expedition proves that nature and unity are often stronger than cold steel. Do you think this expedition could have ended differently with a different command strategy? Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new in-depth analyses of historical events.